Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio. And we will be talking to somebody who knows the Labour Party very well and somebody who knows Keir Starmer very well, Luke Sullivan, who worked for Labour in opposition for a long time. So he will join us to try to decode some of the enormous politics that have swirled around this budget.
One of them is, did Rachel Reeves knowingly say it's all horrendous when she'd been told it was not as horrendous as she said?
And this, I think, is going to be the journalistic awkward question of the weekend. And I think Rachel Reeves has actually stored up quite a lot of potential spiky, uncomfortable problems for her in the coming days. So to give you the short version, I'll try and do that. Newscasters who've been paying attention will have heard us discuss, Rachel Reeves discuss, other ministers discuss on many occasions in the coming weeks that the Treasury thought it was going to be short of cash in the run-up to the budget, and therefore our taxes, including income taxes, might have to go up. Lo and behold, well, actually, the state of the public books was not as bad as had been suggested, and we now know that Rachel Reeves had been told that many weeks before the budget. So then comes this question from Kemi Badenoch and others, is did she mislead the public and the financial markets about how bad things really were in order that she could increase our taxes to pursue the policies that she wanted to?
So let's listen to her at her news conference on the 4th of November.
Alongside the budget this month, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the UK's public finance watchdog, will set out the conclusions of their review of the supply side of the UK economy. I will not preempt those conclusions, but it is already clear that the productivity performance that we inherited from the last government is weaker than previously thought. A less productive economy is one that produces less output per hour worked. That has consequences for working people, for their jobs, and for their wages. And it has consequences for the public finances too, in lower tax receipts. It's not a question of how hard people work. Poor productivity means that we're putting in more, but getting out less.
Missing from that is that while productivity was downgraded, tax receipts were upgraded, and in a plot twist that could not have been predicted, we know that because the OBR have published the advice they gave.
That's right. And things have obviously been very, very, very catty between the OBR and the Treasury this week. The OBR is the independent homework checker that look at the Treasury's numbers and the people who make the estimates for where the economy is going in the years to come. So they're a very important, very significant organisation. They're already on the naughty step because they managed to publish all the numbers nearly an hour before the budget. But they put out into the public domain the fact that they'd told the Chancellor before she gave that press conference, weeks before she actually delivered the budget, that there wasn't a hole in the economy overall anymore because tax receipts had gone up, inflation had gone up, and that made a difference to things. So actually the result of this downgrade, as it was not going to be the fact that she had to scratch around to raise cash. So in short, because I know this is all really complicated and I'm looking at you as a former financial journalist in New York of all places. We're trying to make this simple, but the simplest way maybe of describing it is she told us she was going to have to put taxes up because circumstances beyond her control had nicked some of the government's money. That we now know is not true. Well, it's very interesting, this, because the OBR was introduced by the Conservatives who promised it in opposition in the wake of the financial crash. And they were trying to solve a problem that they identified as essentially the Chancellor's, whoever it was, is able to make up some pretendy numbers to make themselves look good and to suit their political desires. They said, no, we're not going to have that anymore. We're not going to have people like the clunking fist of Gordon Brown telling us what's really going on in the economy. We're going to, as an Osborneism, we're going to create this independent organisation and they're all going to do that for us. Nearly 20 years later, what you have is in an organisation that's not accountable to voters, but who sets the all-important framework of what's really going on in the economy, and it creates the space for what politicians can and can't do. And although when Liz Truss fell foul of the OBR, Labour, of course, said the OBR is terribly important, they must be obeyed, they're this incredible organisation with amazing integrity, and it's very awful that Liz Truss didn't pay any attention to them. We have seen this week, all is not well now between the Office for Budget Responsibility and the Treasury. All is not well at all. And one of the interesting changes, but boring, but interesting changes in our trade is that the OBR will now only be giving these forecasts once a year. That's quite an important change that was part of the budgetary overall thing. So rather than having every 6 months the OBR giving a big, thumbs up or thumbs down to what the government are doing, and everybody across the piece, I think, hopes that might make things a bit more stable. And frankly, what some people might suggest is a bit less crackers, because you've got this organisation that's essentially telling politicians how much they can spend if they want to stick to the rules they've set. And they don't have democratic accountability, but they have enormous influence.
They do. A spokesperson for the Treasury said about all of this, we are not going to get into the OBR's processes or speculate on how that relates to the internal decision-making in the build-up to a budget. But the Chancellor made her choices to cut the cost of living, cut hospital waiting lists and double headroom to cut the cost of our debt.
I think the problem, though, here is that Rachel Reeves said, oh, there's lower tax receipts because of the productivity downgrade. It's all terrible because of the productivity downgrade. That warning for the OBR that the economy was basically more skint than they'd previously thought. That's not what the numbers that they sent to the Treasury suggested, because tax had come in much more healthily than expected. She also went on and did an interview, just one of many, for example, with our colleague Matt Chorley on 5 Live, where she said, the only way I can meet my manifesto commitments is if I cut capital spending. And she said that after she'd been given these numbers from the OBR, saying, actually, you've got a bit more to play with than you might have thought. And it's not about misleading journalists through scurrilous briefings, right? Briefings are normal, but it's about whether or not this crossed a line. And it's given, like it or not, it's given their opponents and the Conservatives, and also some people in the city I've talked to about this are absolutely hopping mad because they claim that she did mislead them about the state of the books, suggesting that there were circumstances beyond her control that meant she would have to put our taxes up. When in actual fact, what seems to be the case now is that she put our taxes up because of choices, political choices that she wants to make. So it's not that journalists will be cross saying, oh, some spin doctor told me something that turned out not to be quite true in a nudge, nudge, hint, hint way, although there will be journalists who think that. It's about the message that was communicated and the perception that was created to the public and their financial markets. And I just wonder if this might all get quite bumpy in the coming days.
Well, you'll be interviewing the Chancellor on
We will.
For me, it's a reminder that a budget is seen as an economic event, but it's a giant political event. And therefore, it can be levied at her that she chose to put up taxes in order to increase spending on welfare. That's the political charge.
That's right. And that's what's on some of the front pages this morning, calling her the Chancellor instead of the Chancellor, talking about, misleading people in order to splurge on benefits Britain. And of course, that's all manna from heaven for her critics on the right. But the point is not, is it legitimate politically for a Labour government to decide to give more state support to big families who haven't got very much money? Clearly, for a Labour government, that's a perfectly legitimate argument to make. The point is, what was her explanation for putting our taxes up? And the perception, of course, before the general election is that the Labour Party wasn't going to put our taxes up at all. And perception when it comes to politics, of course, the minutiae are really important, but the overall perception is absolutely vital too. And I'm just not sure how easy the Labour Party is going to feel about all this over the weekend and in the coming days. I am pleased to say we are joined now by someone who can help us with all of this decoding, is Luke Sullivan, who worked for Keir Starmer in the Labour Party for a long time. So you know the party inside out, but now you are on the outside. So spectating in an informed way about what on earth is going on. So should we start with the Reeves? Is it porky pies or not, Luke? What do you make of how they handled the briefing and the run up to the budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion and we've probably been speaking about it for sort of 12 or so weeks. I look at it slightly differently. I think for the Chancellor, given the stakes politically and economically, and I'm not sure, is she on the TV shows tomorrow?
She is. She certainly is.
Which is a change, isn't it? This was a new thing that actually I think Rachel and her team did well, which was there's no point coming on your show the Sunday before the budget and saying I can't talk, come out and sell it afterwards. So interesting that she'll be there and answer it. I think from their point of view, yes, this is a slightly uncomfortable topic in terms of what was said to journalists. I think the question from her point of view will be that is where the focus is, given how high the stakes are. They probably won't be that worried, I wonder. Now, I think the question is, how hard do journalists go in on them? I think some of the papers today were using some pretty strong language.
Liar.
Yeah. And I mean, for me in politics, I think that's pretty much the strongest allegation that can be made against you now. Is that an editorial decision that those newspapers have taken, or do senior journalists start going down and saying that they feel like they were misled?
But isn't it a question, whatever the journalist knows is out of joint or not, or whether it's just the agenda of some of the critics that they've got in the press? It's about the impression that they were given to the public.
Someone was sort of saying to me, from the spring statement, the back and forth with the OBR, and you've got a bit of this in the statement that the Treasury that you read out, saying we're not going to get into the sort of processology, the time frame. But one of the things that was said to me by a very senior source, not from HMT, but a very senior source, was saying from the spring statement, 3 weeks out, the projections were sort of 22 billion out from where it landed. And it may be that some of the judgment in the, in Treasury and Rachel's approach was the experience of these figures having bounced around between projections quite wildly. And that time it closed quite dramatically to help the government and the Chancellor's position. But I do think a bit of the experience may be that the numbers had moved so much previously and just making sure they absolutely had the room for manoeuvre on top of, and it's clear they were considering breaching the manifesto commitment on income tax, maybe because they thought a sort of, the straightforward income tax single big revenue raiser rather than, the smorgasbord approach that she went for was one of the sort of considerations they were under.
And it's an important point because just as the numbers proved to be much better in the last 4 weeks, they could also have been proven to be much worse in the last 4 weeks. And it is a difficult thing. And a lot of people, I think, are thinking this weekend, after all the jiggery-pokery, that there is something not right with that relationship between all the power that the OBR has in the Treasury, that the position it puts the Treasury in. And I just wonder if it's becoming more of a sort of fashionable thing in the political world to say, oh, yes, the OBR, well, not quite the shiny, marvellous example that they were set up to be. But we'll see.
Would you agree with me? We've got the budget that Rishi Sunak promised, not the budget that Keir Starmer promised he'd deliver.
No, I don't think that's right. I think Rachel took some really. I think one way of categorising the budget was a Labour budget, and I think some commentators have called it a tax and spend. I think it's different to that. I think there's a number of different stories she could have made. Actually, and it'll be very interesting to see what Rachel says on your show tomorrow. I think there is a very compelling argument to say headroom at £9 and a bit billion. I know these sound astronomical sums, but in the running a country like the UK,
it's buttons, isn't it? Yeah.
Is not a lot of money. Actually, to raise the headroom to £22 billion had an effect straight away. We saw, and actually the OBR report leaking 2 hours earlier, whilst politically and news-wise interesting, actually may have helped her that the budget was known so early in advance. The markets, we saw straight away gilt markets move, and the amount of money that the government borrow, how much it costs them, go down straight away. And now, look, that sounds really technical, but I suspect next month, if we get the Bank of England deciding to lower interest rates, Rachel and the government may feel vindicated that some of the decisions they've taken.
I read the manifesto myself to interview Lisa Nandy on Newsnight, and it said in there that there'd be day one provision for unfair dismissal rights, and that was dropped. So that is another example. So I think what we're really getting at is that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have done a budget for the party, not for the country. And they're open to that, being criticised for that, because the MPs seem happier now than they were because of the two-child benefit cap being removed.
Yeah, look, I think there is some fairness to say that the government on the employment rights bill, I think they have conceded, and I think it's perfectly reasonable that they have. Actually, I think as ever, when you're trying to get laws passed and you're dealing with really complex employment rights changes, there is an ability, and you have to be able to juggle. And look, frankly, there's an interesting line that Barack Obama used to say when he used to get into trouble was sometimes just admit, yes, things have gone wrong and we've slightly changed our mind. And I think sometimes in politics, it would just be better just to say, look, you know what? We have got 95% of what we were seeking to achieve. This is going to be a generational change in employment rights. And we need to get the balance right between the trade unions and business and growth. And that's what we think this package is going to do. I think it would have been better just to have said that's what they've done, frankly, rather than get into the semantics of have we slightly tweaked on what is quite a small issue. And actually, the broad range of the Labour Party is very happy with where they've got to. And
they have, though, created another row with the leftward fringe of the party. And there are some quite sort of, dark mutterings about that. And equally, some people, I think it's fair to say, were sort of spluttering about the timing of this. So you end up making some of the PLP, the Labour backbenchers, unhappy within 12 hours of making them happy with some of the things that were in the budget. And someone said, oh, well, you can't grid the negotiations. In other ways, that was happening separately to the budget, and it was all a bit of a kind of mess that it came out. But for some people, that was a kind of, it's another sign that they haven't politically really got a grip here. But I just wonder, in terms of the mood of the Labour Party, though, has it changed as a result of the budget?
I mean, no, is my honest truth. I think the budget has done what the government, what Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister needed it to do. It got the support of the markets and it got the support of the PLP. I don't think we're going to have some big rebellion on some fringe taxation measure. But I think it's a misreading of why the Parliamentary Labour Party are where they are. The issue, in a way, isn't necessarily what the government's doing. I think the key driver of all behaviour of all politicians is the poll rating. And I know it sounds vulgar, but that is the ball game. And frankly, if the Labour Party were at 35, 40% in the polls, none of this would matter. The MPs would be very, very happy. The problem, and this is what is driving so much of the behaviour, the problems, people going into different places is, essentially think of MPs as small business people. They look at the poll rating, they work out on the MRP poll whether they're going to be re-elected in the next election. And that, almost more than anything else, drives their behaviour and their feeling. And until that issue is resolved, or they have a view that they believe the government's got the right strategy, I don't think fundamentally you change their behaviour and where things are. And I know that sounds simplistic, but that's my assessment of what drives this.
So newscasters, note that, because sometimes over the years, to me and Paddy, politicians say, we don't pay any attention to polls. There's only one poll that matters. It's when you put your cross in the box with a stubby little pencil. From time to time, Paddy and I think you and I have both suggested that's complete nonsense. Here is Luke Sullivan, who worked for Labour for a long time, confirming, don't listen to politicians when they say they don't look at the polls, because it's nonsense. It's what drives a lot of their behaviour.
Yeah, it's very candid, and it's great that you've given us so much time. One of the other things I think everyone's worried about is the fact that the Tories were very unpopular in government. And it's not just Conservatives who are worried about that, it's Democrats. Because if you start adding the fact that the Tories in government were very unpopular to the fact that Labour in government is very unpopular, you've really got 5 full years of disenchanted voters thinking they try and pull levers and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that makes people feel very disaffected. Of course, it's a huge opportunity for the less conventional parties, so for Reform, and also for the Greens, who've been doing incredibly well. It's a huge opportunities for those sort of challengers on the right and the challengers on the left. But certainly you find that right across the centre, for want of a better word. There's a very deep anxiety that, again, you've got a government that within 18 months is incredibly unpopular and is in a position where this budget is trying to solve a problem they ought never to have had. in that their own lot think that they're not very good at what they're doing. I mean, just express for us, Luke, you know all these people and you know all the characters. How profound is this sort of anxiety and the disappointment about how things have gone since July last year?
Yeah, I mean, look, they understand the political situation they're in. And I think, when the Prime Minister spoke, when Keir spoke in September, it came through in the sort of series of interviews he did. And I think he did a lot of reflection after that first year in government. I think, fundamentally, their analysis of it is that the public are very, very frustrated with all politics and all politicians. And they wanted rid of the Tories. And that was a big part of why the Labour Party had the sort of massive mandate they got on quite a sort of small vote share. They do get it, and look, I thought that the briefing the other week, sort of putting up Keir's leadership in lights, was insane, but that comes from a place of them recognising the challenges they face. Now, from Keir's point of view and the team in and around him, they will say, and I know they say, and this is how Keir thinks, he will say, everybody at different points in my life or different points in my political leadership have written me off. When I was elected leader in April 2020, people said, good luck to you. Good luck, let's see you in 5 years' time. And he got elected. And, Keir is one of those people who will think he has the ability to absolutely turn this round and, pursue a strategy. I think if I was being critical of where they've got to, I think at certain times, and it's really difficult because, it's like hard to know what's the crisis that's going to be the big one, how to respond. I think going back to that point about MPs being driven by the poll rating, I think there is a danger that you let the PLP decide what the political strategy is, because there's no way 400 odd people can do that. You need to listen to them and engage in them. And I think it was right after welfare that they had that, speaking to the Labour MPs and seeing where they are. But I also worry that the political strategy that got the Labour Party elected, which was being pretty centre road, being very clear on the things, to your points on the budget, about how you were going to deliver that, has got pulled away at the seams, and they've lost their confidence. Now, fundamentally, they need to get back to that place of delivering the political strategy and also being a competent government fixing, because that's what's going to get them through in the long run.
What do you both think about Kemi Badenoch's transformation? I mean, we've said here before, she was seen as by critics as being so bad at the start that they thought Labour was writing her questions at parliamentary question time. And here she is taking the fight ever since the Peter Mandelson moment. Do you see a new brio around Kemi Badenoch? You've met her many times.
I think there's definitely a new atmosphere around her leadership, I think, without question. And even Tories who were her real detractors, and including those people who wanted to support her but thought, oh God, it's not really working. That mood's changed. Now, I don't think there's anybody around the Conservative leadership or the front bench who think, oh, that means that they're nailed on, bang on, it's all going to be fine. They know that they are still in a very bad place. But the assumption that probably after May, the Tories would get an absolute humping and Kemi Badenoch would have to go because of that assumption is now gone, because they're seeing her partly improve a lot in Parliament. Now, remember, you might say a cautionary tale from the past. William Hague was absolutely brilliant in Prime Minister's questions. Every week, the Tory backbenchers creased themselves with whatever, new japes or gags he was making at Tony Blair's expense. He was a brilliantly effective Commons performer much of the time. Beware the Conservatives who think that Kemi Badenoch's performance, much improved performance at Prime Minister's questions, will translate into the public suddenly going, oh, we're ready to give them another go, but have the political atmospherics around her leadership changed. Yes, absolutely. And interestingly, this is not scientific, but I think we've been seeing and hearing a little bit less of Robert Jenrick of late.
Yes. And so stick with the women. So Rachel Reeves is wobbling. Kemi Badenoch is strong. And Angela Rayner is silent. What will her intervention, when it comes, mean to the Labour Party mood?
Well, I think people are not unreasonably interested in what she has to say, and she also, unless you hear her say it, don't believe, the mutterings in and around that allegedly come from allies of Angela.
So that's a very useful thing for newscasters
Sorry.
to hear. No, don't apologise. That's very useful thing.
Sorry,
very
useful? Okay.
I wouldn't invite you on here and then say you are useless. That would be terribly rude.
That's my job.
We can clip that.
That's a very useful thing for people to hear. An example of how people who speak in politicians' names, sometimes chattering away to journalists, aren't necessarily doing so. And you said there that Angela Rayner has always been very loyal to Labour leaders.
Yeah, I think she has. And I think she is of the view that, an elected Labour leader, I think elected Labour Prime Minister, the bar is very, very high. And look, it's interesting that the Prime Minister, presumably in response to a question last week when he was in the G20 at Johannesburg, saying that he would like Angela back. I think, that is an interesting theme. And Kemi went on it at PMQs in her sort of medley before the budget in PMQs, where she asked him, or sort of made light of having Angela back. But look, there's no doubt she's a huge talent, and I think the manner of her exit, whilst painful to the Labour Party, I think also meant that it was possible for her to come back. And actually, whilst the review ultimately meant she had to go, I also think it had all the seeds of how she can come back.
It was a mistake, not a dastardly deed, according to that report. That's all we've got time for on BBC News. But if you want to hear more of our conversation, you can go to BBC Sounds. Goodbye for now.